We're on verdict watch tonight. A Michigan jury has now been deliberating for more than 9 hours in the case of James Crumbley. He is the father of the Oxford High School shooter who killed 4 of his classmates back in November of 2021. Just last month, his wife Jennifer was found guilty by a jury after 11 hours of deliberation. That marked the very first time a parent was convicted over their child's murderous rampage. Like his wife, James faces 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter and up to 15 years in prison if found guilty. But in this case, the jury will decide if James failed to properly store the 9mm gun, which his son Ethan used in the shooting. I want to bring in Misty Marris, trial attorney and legal analyst. Misty, good to have you here. First of all, are you surprised we don't have a verdict yet?
I thought we would have a verdict earlier today. The trial went so fast and much quicker than the Jennifer Crumbley case. But I will say the jurors have chosen to deliberate beyond the 4:30 p.m. deadline where they would normally go home and pick it up tomorrow morning. That leads me to believe that they're pretty close, and maybe we'll get a verdict tonight.
All right. Prosecutors had said that James was on trial not for what his son did, but for what he did and didn't do, notably secure the 9mm gun he had just bought for his son.
Absolutely. That's the primary argument of the prosecution, that this gun was accessible to Ethan. He was able to access the gun and ultimately bring it into the school. And so that access is primarily part of the prosecution's case. Now, on the defense side, they say there were no laws relating to storage, that he wasn't required to keep a trigger lock on the gun. And so the mere fact that it was not stored in a safe or locked up is not enough to fulfill that standard of gross negligence.
Yeah, except if you have a troubled son who you've just bought a gun for. You know, it's interesting, Misty, because Crumbley's lawyer told jurors there was no evidence that James knew his son was a danger to anyone. But when the news hit that there was a school shooting, James immediately called 911 and said he thought it was his son who was the shooter. Most parents are calling 911 to find out if their child was a victim.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the uphill battle for the defense on that point. They have to show that James's aha moment, where he puts all the pieces together, happens after, that it wasn't foreseeable before this terrible act occurred. That is a really, really challenging road to hoe. And that's because, like you said, most people on that jury who are parents are going to say they'd be more concerned about whether or not their child was okay than have a moment where they think, wow, was my son the shooter? Let me call 911.
It clearly shows that he knew his son was capable of it. He didn't immediately go to, oh, my God, has my child been shot? He immediately went to, oh, my God, did my child kill other children? The defense also said that, quote, James had no idea his son was having a hard time. How could that possibly be true? He was like, there were red lights and warning lights everywhere. This child was telling everybody and showing in every way possible that he was not okay.
Yeah, the defense made the argument that James was not on certain text messages between Ethan and a friend where he was saying that he was seeking help from his parents. And James said he was a good kid. He never got into trouble. I had no idea he had this violent propensity. But Elizabeth, I think there's one thing that really undercuts that, and it's the drawing. Even if you can believe that prior to that time, James didn't realize how the depths of his child's mental health had declined. That drawing, that day, knowing that there was a gun in the house, that's how I think we are going to see a guilty verdict. Now, deliberations have gone on for quite some time. So the jurors are obviously grappling with the facts, which is better for the defense. But ultimately, I don't think they're going to be able to overcome that hurdle.
Yeah, we're showing right now what Ethan drew on his math worksheet the morning of the school shooting, in which he drew all these very disturbing drawings, including the 9mm gun that his father had just bought for him a few days earlier and had failed to secure because it was in Ethan's backpack while he was drawing and the blood. In the meantime, prosecutors called 15 witnesses in this trial. Defense called just one. It was James's sister, and James, unlike his wife Jennifer, did not take the stand in his own defense. Was that smart or a mistake?
I think they were looking at the diagnostic of Jennifer's trial and saw the way it went and maybe make the determination that James should not take the stand, that it might not help him. And I do think in Jennifer's trial it was necessary for her to explain that relationship between her and her son because of those text messages. Here the defense said, let's focus on what the prosecution did not show. And so strategically, they had to make that game time decision. As far as his sister's testimony, the defense was trying to show that his sister had had contact with Ethan and James, that she'd seen Ethan about 4 months before and didn't see any issues. But the prosecution really tore that apart on cross, identifying that James and his sister didn't really speak that often, and that 4 months, well, this decline in his mental health happened in those days after, the dog died, his grandmother died, his friend was no longer around. So it really didn't move the needle from the defense perspective.
All right, Jennifer Crumbley was found guilty of these same charges last month. She's going to be sentenced next month. What do you think she's going to get? She faces up to 15 years in prison.
So the prosecution is going to present aggravating factors, and in this case, we know what that's going to be: the horrible, horrible incident and deaths that occurred in this school. We saw that evidence presented at trial. It's so emotional. And then the defense is going to present mitigating factors, and they're going to focus on many of the aspects that we saw during the trial, that Jennifer was not aware that Ethan was going to take that gun and go into the school. So the judge has discretion in that sense. And I don't know if we're going to see the full 15, but I think we're going to see something pretty close to it, given the circumstances.
Not a handful of years. Wow, real historic verdict, with her conviction last month. We're awaiting the jury's decision with her husband. By the way, it's worth noting that both James and Jennifer ran from the law, hid out, and then hired themselves a good lawyers while their son was sitting in a jail cell getting the services of a free public defender. Pretty interesting there. Misty Marris, thank you so much. We'll probably be talking to you, if not later on tonight, then tomorrow, because I think the verdict will probably come pretty soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Elizabeth.
All right, coming up.